Turn that off. This is illegal invasion of privacy, Garrick roared, lunging forward to smash the tablet. Bam! Vance's tall assistant, in reality an undercover FBI agent. 2 weeks later, UPMC Mercy Hospital. The steady, cold beep, beep of a ventilator was the only sound inside the intensive care unit, ICU. Dr. Stevens, a middle-aged man with a grave expression, flipped through the medical chart and then looked at Maris, who stood beside the hospital bed with her arms crossed. "I'm very sorry to have to tell you this, Miss Maris," the doctor said, his voice low, somber, and blunt in classic American fashion. "Elian survived. That in itself is a miracle. But the injury to the C4 cervical vertebra has completely severed the neural signal pathways." Maris frowned, not from grief, but from not fully understanding. What does that mean? When can he go back to work? The insurance isn't going to pay forever. The doctor sighed and gestured toward Elian, who lay motionless, an endotracheal tube in his throat, eyes wide open and fixed on the ceiling, unable to blink. "He has quadriplegia. Worse than that, he is in what we call locked-in syndrome. He is conscious, he can hear us, he understands what we are saying, but his body is a prison. He cannot move, cannot speak, and even breathing on his own is difficult." Maris froze. She looked down at the man who had once been powerfully built, now reduced to an unmoving mass of flesh tangled in tubes and wires. For a brief moment, fear overtook her, but almost immediately as her gaze drifted to the logo on the briefcase of the law firm representing the construction corporation, waiting to negotiate outside, another cold spark flashed in her mind. Elian lay there, hearing every word clearly. He wanted to scream, to say, "I'm still here," but not a single muscle obeyed him. A lone tear slowly rolled from the corner of his eye down onto the pillow. The tragedy had only just begun. The December night wind in Pittsburgh howled through the steel beams of the interstate highway construction site, carrying with it a bone-cutting cold of -10 degrees Fahrenheit, -23 degrees Celsius. Elian, 32 years old, tightened his grip on the welding pliers in his hands, the thick leather gloves already stiff from frost. He was a pipe fitter with Local 449, a typical American working man with broad shoulders and calloused hands. Behind his protective mask, his breath condensed into cloudy white plumes. This was the 14th straight hour he'd been working today. Just a few more double shifts, Elian told himself, as welding sparks scattered across the icy concrete below. In his mind appeared the image of this month's mortgage bill, $2,400. The one-story house in the suburbs was old and worn, but it was the American dream he had traded his entire youth for. He wanted to fix the front porch next spring so Maris, his wife, would have a place to sit and drink her coffee every morning. But 10 miles away, inside a cramped rented apartment that reeked of stale food, Maris was not dreaming about a porch. Maris, 26 years old, tossed her blue Walmart uniform vest on the sofa in frustration. 8 hours standing at the checkout counter, listening to customers complain about milk going up another 50 cents had driven her insane. She stretched out on the couch, her thumbs scrolling furiously through Instagram. On the screen was a photo of an old classmate checking in at a Miami resort, a brand new Gucci bag gleaming beside her. "Look at them," she muttered bitterly, kicking a pile of cheap reusable bags in the corner of the room. "And I'm stuck with a greasy-smelling welder and a mountain of endless debt. God, this life is so unfair." She had no idea that true unfairness was racing toward her at terrifying speed. Back at the construction site, the clock struck 2 a.m. A sharp, dry crack rang out from tower number 4, a sound like a gunshot tearing through the stillness of the night. A load-bearing steel cable, improperly maintained in violation of safety standards, snapped clean through. Elian looked up on instinct, but it was already too late. A 2-ton I-beam, approximately 1,800 kilograms, plunged straight down from a height of 30 feet. Darkness swallowed his vision faster than pain ever could. A horrifying impact shook the ground, accompanied by the sound of metal grinding into bone and flesh. Elion's world went black in an instant. 3 weeks after the accident, the air inside a luxurious, mahogany-paneled conference room on the 40th floor of a downtown Pittsburgh skyscraper was thick with tension. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sparkled, but inside, a negotiation over a human life was underway. Sitting across from Maris was the legal representative of the Hamilton Construction Group. The corporation's lawyer, dressed in a perfectly tailored Armani suit, slid a thick folder across the table toward her. On top lay a check with a pre-printed number that could steal the breath from anyone who saw it. "Mrs. Maris," the lawyer said, his tone professional yet hurried, "my client acknowledges fault in the crane maintenance process under OSHA standards. To avoid a prolonged lawsuit that would cause emotional distress to the family, we are offering a one-time lump sum settlement of $5.2 million US. In exchange, you will sign a full liability waiver and a permanent non-disclosure agreement." $5.2 million. Maris's pupils dilated. She struggled to suppress a sharp, involuntary breath. That number was larger than the combined lifetime earnings of 10 welders put together. In her mind appeared not images of wheelchairs or ventilators for her husband, but penthouses overlooking the river and sleek German sports cars. "Hold on." The firm voice of Attorney Vance, Elion's legal representative, cut through Maris's drifting thoughts. Vance adjusted his glasses, looked directly at Maris, then turned to the opposing side. "This money is meant to sustain Elion's life for the next 40 years. Under the law, given Elion's lack of legal capacity, the funds must be placed directly into a special needs medical trust. It must be managed by an independent third party to cover medical expenses, and most importantly, to preserve Elion's eligibility for state medical benefits." Maris's face hardened. A trust? Third-party management? That meant she would have to beg for every dollar just to buy a handbag. Not a chance. She shot to her feet, slammed her hand on the table, and performed the role of an outraged, suffering wife to perfection. "Mr. Vance, what are you implying? I am his legal wife. I am the one bathing him and caring for him every single day," Maris shouted, crocodile tears welling in her eyes. "My husband is lying paralyzed in a bed, and you want strangers controlling our family's money? I will not accept any trust. I want direct control, or we go to court and you'll see what the press writes about a devoted wife being oppressed by lawyers." The construction company's representatives grimaced. They wanted no involvement with the media. The opposing lawyer waved his hand impatiently. "Fine, fine. We don't care who holds the money as long as the paperwork is signed today." Attorney Vance looked at Maris with deep suspicion, but under pressure from his client, the legal spouse, he could only sigh helplessly. Maris grabbed the pen and scribbled her signature across the documents. The moment the pen lifted from the paper, she knew she had sold her soul. But for $5.2 million, the price was a steal. 5 days after the fateful signing, Maris's iPhone vibrated with a short notification that carried the weight of 1,000 tons. It was an alert from Wells Fargo. The first disbursement from the escrow account had been released and deposited neatly into her savings account. The long string of digits in the balance sent Maris rushing into the hospital bathroom, locking the door behind her and laughing alone at her reflection for a full 10 minutes. When she stepped back out, she was transformed. The anxious, submissive wife who tiptoed around doctors was gone. In the hospital room, Nurse Brenda, a seasoned ICU nurse hired privately by the insurance company, was carefully suctioning mucus through Elion's endotracheal tube. Elion winced from the discomfort, but his eyes softened as Brenda gently patted his shoulder in reassurance. "Nurse Brenda," Maris said, her voice icy, arms crossed, as she leaned against the doorframe, "you can stop now and pack up your things." Brenda turned back in confusion, the suction tube still in her hand. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Maris. I don't understand. I still have 4 hours left in my shift, and according to the home health care plan next week, there is no next week." Maris cut her off, stepping forward and yanking the medical chart from the nurse's hands. "I just reviewed the bills. $8,000 a month for private nursing care. That's ridiculous. The insurance has already paid out a lump sum. That money is my family's money now, and I'm not throwing it out the window for things I can do myself." "But ma'am," Brenda tried to explain, her voice rising with concern for the patient, "Mr. Elian's condition is extremely complex. He needs airway suctioning every 2 hours, repositioning to prevent bed sores, and continuous oxygen monitoring. You don't have medical training." "I am his wife," Maris snapped, her voice overpowering Brenda's logic. She lowered her voice and smiled, a fake, chilling smile. "No one takes care of a husband better than his wife. Love will make up for skill. Now please leave my husband's room immediately." Elian lay there, witnessing everything. He saw Brenda glance at him one last time with helpless compassion before picking up her bag and walking out. The hospital room door closed, leaving Elian alone with Maris. Maris turned to face her husband. The devoted wife smile vanished like a burned-out light bulb. She stared at the heart monitor, its erratic lines jumping across the screen, and let out an irritated sigh. "Don't look at me like that, Elian," she muttered, dragging a chair closer but not sitting, instead propping her feet up while her eyes stayed glued to a luxury shopping website. $8,000 a month could buy a Birkin bag. You're lying there anyway. What do you need a fancy nurse for? Whether you live long or not is up to fate. Inside his motionless chest, his heart clenched. His final shield, the professional nurse, had been stripped away. Now his life rested entirely in the hands of a woman calculating whether his survival was less worth than a handbag. The next morning, Maris drove her old car to the local Chase Bank branch. Inside her handbag was a check worth several $1,000,000. When she slid the check through the bulletproof glass, the young female teller stared at the long string of numbers, her eyes widening in shock before she hurriedly picked up the internal phone. Less than 2 minutes later, a man stepped out from the glass-walled offices in the back. It was Garrick, 40 years old, the branch's senior wealth manager. Garrick was nothing like the men in this dusty industrial town. He wore a perfectly tailored Armani suit that hugged his body, a gleaming Rolex Submariner on his wrist, and a toothpaste commercial white smile. He had the keen nose of a great white shark. He could smell new money from miles away. "Mrs." Maris approached, his voice deep, warm, and persuasive, ignoring the line of customers waiting behind her. "A client with your financial standing shouldn't be standing at a standard service counter. Please come to my VIP office. We have exceptional espresso." Inside the soundproofed, thickly carpeted room, Garrick poured coffee for Maris. He didn't rush into interest rates. He studied her worn handbag, her hungry yet hesitant gaze as she took in the luxurious interior. He knew immediately this was prime prey, a woman who had suddenly become wealthy, lonely, and overflowing with long-suppressed material desires. "I've heard about your husband's tragedy. The whole town is talking about it," Garrick began, his tone feigning deep sympathy as he leaned back into the leather chair. "But I also see a strong woman carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. The question is, are you going to let $5 million sit still and be eaten away by 7% inflation? Or do you want to turn it into $10 million to compensate for all the suffering you've endured?" "$10 million?" Maris blurted out, her eyes lighting up. Garrick leaned forward, lowering his voice like a conspirator. "The court and the lawyers want you to park that money in safe, low-yield government bonds. That's how they control you. But I know high-risk, high-return channels, hedge funds, crypto, vacation real estate. I can help you double that money as long as you trust me and keep it secret from those old, dusty lawyers." He placed his well-manicured hand over Maris's trembling hand. "You deserve to enjoy life, Maris. You're young, beautiful, and you still have a long road ahead. Don't bury your youth along with your husband's accident." The words hit Morris like a stimulant injected straight into her veins. She looked at Garrick, the embodiment of wealth and power she had always craved. She no longer saw a bank executive, she saw a key to escape this dull, suffocating life. "What do I have to do?" Morris asked, her voice thirsty with desire. Garrick smiled, the smile of a predator watching its prey walk willingly into the trap. "First, we need to move the money out of the joint oversight account. Tonight, I'll come by your house for a private consultation, all right?" The day Elian was discharged from the hospital, rain poured relentlessly from the sky. Instead of having him taken to the spacious master bedroom on the second floor, Morris instructed the medical staff to wheel his gurney into the dining room on the ground floor. She had hastily hired workers to put up a few flimsy drywall panels bought from Home Depot, sealing the area off and turning it into something closer to a pen than a patient's room. No garden-facing window, no television. Just 4 cold white walls and the pungent smell of cheap paint. "Keeping him here is more convenient," Morris said to the medical staff as they transferred Elian onto the rented hospital bed. "I don't want to be running up and down the stairs all day." When the front door closed, silence swallowed the house. Elian lay motionless, eyes wide open. The only thing connecting him to the human world was the Tobii Dynavox tablet, a device that tracked eye movement, allowing him to select letters to communicate. It was his tongue. It was his voice. Morris paced back and forth, the sharp clicks of her heels echoing against the wooden floor. She glanced at the tablet mounted on its stand in front of Elian. On the screen, Elian was struggling to form the words with his eyes. THIRSTY. Morris looked at the words, then at Elian. A weary, cruel smile appeared. "You know, Elian, that thing makes a really annoying beep-beep sound. It gives me a headache." With that, she reached out and twisted the tablet's stand, turning the screen completely toward the wall, entirely out of Elian's view. Elian's world went dark. Panic surged through him as his eyes darted desperately searching for the screen, but all he saw was empty, shapeless space. He wanted to scream, "Don't! Give me my voice back!" But his throat produced only the weak mechanical rasp of the ventilator. "Get some rest," Morris said indifferently, then stepped out beyond the partition, switching off the light and leaving him in dim darkness. From the living room just a few steps away, separated only by the thin drywall partition, Elian heard the pop of a wine cork, then Morris's giggle, her voice suddenly sweet and soft as she spoke into the phone. "Garrick, yeah, the burden is home now. Don't worry, he lies there like a log. Yeah, I'm free tonight. I'm very lonely." Elian lay there, tears streaming inward, listening to his wife flirt with another man inside the very house he had bled and broken his body to pay for. The torture didn't come from whips or blows. It came from absolute helplessness, from being forced to listen to his own wife's betrayal as a captive audience. 7 o'clock Friday evening. Garrick pulled his black Porsche 911 to a stop right in front of the house, the engine's roar shattering the quiet of the working-class neighborhood. He walked inside as if he were the new owner, carrying a paper bag from the most expensive steakhouse in the city and a bottle of 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon. "Hi, sweetheart," Maris said as she opened the door, wearing a thin wine-red silk dress, her face carefully made up. They exchanged a wet, lingering kiss right in the hallway, completely ignoring Elian's presence behind the flimsy partition. The cruelty truly began when dinner was served. Instead of eating in the kitchen, Garrick suggested with a wicked smile, "Why don't we eat here so Elian can feel included?" He dragged a small table over and placed it right beside the hospital bed, only a few feet from Elian's face. The rich smell of garlic butter and perfectly grilled Wagyu beef, medium rare, flooded Elian's senses. His stomach clenched in a natural reflex, but he couldn't swallow. At that exact moment, the automatic feeding pump beside him whirred to life, pushing a stream of bland, light brown liquid directly into his stomach through the PEG tube. Garrick lifted his dark red wine glass under the dim yellow light and swirled it. Come on, a toast to the most generous man in Pennsylvania. Thanks for your broken legs, buddy. Without them, your wife wouldn't have learned what real luxury feels like tonight. He sliced a juicy piece of steak and fed it to Maris, his eyes locked provocatively at Elian. Maris giggled, leaning her head against Garrick's shoulder, her eyes glazed with alcohol. Don't tease him. The doctor said his brain is frozen. He's basically just a decorative houseplant now. But Elian understood everything. Rage erupted in his mind like a volcanic explosion. He wanted to leap up and smash that fake face, to scream curses at his betraying wife. Adrenaline surged through his veins, forcing his heart to pound violently inside his motionless chest. Beep, 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 beep. The heart monitor alarm blared urgently, ripping through the romantic atmosphere. The heart rate on the screen spiked to 145 beats per minute. Jesus, that's annoying, Garrick frowned, slamming his wineglass down. He's ruining the mood. Maris sighed and stood up in irritation. She didn't check whether her husband was in pain or struggling to breathe. She stepped forward and pressed her bright red fingernail hard against the alarm silence button on the machine. There, quiet now, she said, turning back and stroking Garrick's arm. Ignore him. Tonight it's just us. Elian lay there in deadly silence, watching the adulterous pair clink glasses over his physical and emotional agony. His hatred didn't explode outward, it compressed, cold, dense, and sharper than any blade. The 3rd month passed. Although the money had already landed in the account, Attorney Vance remained a thorn in Garrick's side. He kept sending requests for detailed spending reports and threatening to petition the court to appoint an independent guardian if Maris failed to prove that she was managing the funds properly. We need permanent plenary guardianship, Garrick hissed, slamming a thick stack of legal documents onto the kitchen table. He jabbed his finger at a highlighted clause. For the court to grant this and kick that old bastard Vance out, you have to prove that Elian's brain is completely gone. He must be certified as having total cognitive incapacity, not just paralysis. Maris glanced nervously toward Elian. But lately his eyes move really fast. Sometimes I feel like he understands what I'm saying. Garrick pulled a small, unlabeled vial from the inside pocket of his suit jacket. Inside was a clear liquid. He smirked. That's exactly why I brought this. High-dose haloperidol combined with a sedative. It can turn a genius into a soaked sack of cotton in 15 minutes. The next morning, precisely at 9 a.m., Dr. Whitman, the court-appointed neurological evaluator, rang the doorbell. 30 minutes earlier, Maris had crushed 2 sleeping pills, mixed them with Garrick's solution, and injected the toxic blend directly into Elian's PEG feeding tube. When Dr. Whitman entered the room, he saw an Elian completely different from the initial medical reports. Elian lay there with heavy, drooping eyelids, his mouth slightly open, saliva spilling down onto his bib. "Hello, Elian. Can you hear me? If you can, look to your left," Dr. Whitman said loudly, shining a flashlight into his eyes. Inside the paralyzed shell, Elian's mind was screaming. He heard the doctor's voice. He wanted to shift his gaze to signal, but the powerful chemicals were like a dense fog, smothering his brain, severing every neural connection. He gathered every ounce of willpower to move his pupils, but his eyes only drifted dully, unfocused and empty. Poor pupillary response. No signs of cognitive reaction, Dr. Whitman murmured, typing notes into the electronic chart on his iPad. He turned to Maris and shook his head with regret. "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Maris. It appears your husband's condition has deteriorated faster than expected. At this point, he exists only biologically." Maris stood there, clutching her handkerchief, daubing fake tears, while the corner of her mouth twitched with triumph. "So I can make all decisions on his behalf now, Doctor? I only want what's best for him." "Of course," Whitman said, as he shut down the device. "I'll submit my report to the court. With this condition, you'll be granted permanent guardianship by next week." Elian sank deeper into the chemically induced darkness, carrying with him an abyss of despair. They hadn't just stolen his money or his wife, now they were stealing his very status as a human being under the law. 2 nights after the medical evaluation, the house was filled with a sickening sense of excitement. Outside, the first snow of the season fell thick and heavy, blanketing the Pittsburgh suburbs in white. Inside the living room, Garrick was painting a picture of a tropical paradise. He spread a large map across the dining table, pinning down Elian's medication packs. Beside it, a laptop sat open to an online banking interface filled with complex chart windows. "Listen carefully, Maris," Garrick said, his voice low but commanding, fingers tapping rhythmically on the keyboard. "This Friday, the moment the judge brings the gavel down to approve permanent guardianship, I'll execute the wire transfer. The $5.2 million will pass through a shell company in Delaware, then fly straight into a private account in the Cayman Islands. U.S. law can't touch it there." Maris stared at the screen, her eyes burning with greed. "And then?" "Then we fly to Nice, France. I've already scoped out a villa overlooking the Mediterranean. No more cold snow, no more debt, and most importantly," Garrick turned his head and jerked his chin toward Elian, lying motionless in the shadows a few meters away, "no more dead weight." Maris frowned, lowering her voice. "But what do we do with him? I can't just let him starve to death here. The police would investigate for manslaughter." Garrick scoffed and pulled out a crumpled flyer showing a gray, dilapidated brick building. "Relax, I've thought of everything. This is North Pittsburgh State Nursing Home. It's where penniless patients living on Medicaid end up. I've already forged the paperwork to have him admitted Monday morning." He leaned in close, his voice brutal. "There, one nurse watches over 30 patients. They'll dump him in a corner that reeks of bleach and urine, change his diaper once a day. He'll die of pneumonia or infected bed sores within 6 months. And the best part? It's completely legal. The wife is unable to care, so institutional placement was necessary. No one will question it." Elian heard every word. State Nursing Home, Cayman Islands, Friday. Each sentence was like a hammer driving nails into his coffin. They didn't just want to steal his money, they wanted to dump him into a human warehouse to rot away slowly in filth and isolation. Maris picked up the flyer, glanced at it, then shrugged and tossed it into the trash. "Fine, as long as I never have to look at that breathing tube again." That night, in the depths of despair, fear inside Elian transformed into something else. Time was running out. He couldn't wait for a miracle. He had to create one himself or die. That night stretched on like a century. In the cold room, the sound of Maris's snoring drifted down from upstairs, a bitter reminder of Elian's isolation. Elian knew he couldn't sleep. The sedatives Maris had injected earlier were beginning to wear off. He had to use this narrow window from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. to train. It was a life or death secret he had kept hidden for 2 weeks now, ever since he felt a tingling electric current run down his spine during a nightmare. He focused all his will, channeling every remaining ounce of energy into his motionless right arm resting on the thin blanket. Sweat beaded on his forehead, even though the room temperature hovered around 60 degrees Fahrenheit. "Move! You have to move! For Mom and Dad! For justice!" Elian screamed inside his mind. And then the miracle, or rather the result of relentless endurance, appeared. The index finger of his right hand twitched. Just a tiny movement, only a few millimeters, not enough to grasp anything, but enough to touch. It was the reconnection of damaged neural pathways, fragile as spider silk, yet more precious than gold. Elian exhaled through the tube, tears spilling freely. He wasn't completely broken. Next came the test of his voice. His throat was as dry as a desert, his vocal cords atrophied from months of disuse. He tried to force air from his lungs, not through the breathing tube, but through his natural airway. A hoarse, microscopic sound escaped, no louder than a mosquito. It burned like swallowing glass. Elian wanted to scream, to call the police immediately, but the hard-earned reason of a seasoned man stopped him. If he made a sound now, Maris would know. She would increase the dosage, or worse, Garrick would take care of him with some fatal suffocation accident before he ever saw another person. No, Elian told himself, his eyes sharpening in the darkness. Silence is the strongest weapon right now. He shifted his gaze toward the Tobii Dynavox tablet, still mounted on its stand, the screen black in sleep mode. Maris had forgotten to power it off completely. The tiny red dot of the infrared sensor blinked in the darkness like the eye of death. That was his only hope. He didn't need to speak. He only needed irrefutable proof, and he would use their contempt, their belief he was nothing more than a lifeless log, to set the trap. Wednesday night, 2 days before the court hearing, Garrick came again, this time drunk and more excited than ever. He staggered into Elian's patient room, holding an already opened bottle of champagne. He glanced at the Tobii Dynavox tablet facing the wall, sneered, then roughly grabbed the mount and forcefully twisted it back around, shoving the screen close to Elian's face. "Hey, open your eyes and look," Garrick slurred, tapping on the pitch-black screen. "I want you to see how happy I am with your wife. Don't hide in the corner anymore." He didn't turn the device on. He only turned it around so Elian would be forced to witness what was about to happen, treating it like a sick joke. Then he tossed the bottle on the table and lunged toward Maris, who was already waiting on the worn leather sofa, positioned directly within the tablet's line of sight. Elian lay motionless, his heart pounding violently. This was it. The arrogance of evil was always its greatest weakness. As Maris and Garrick began to entangle themselves, laughter and moans filled the small room. They completely forgot the existence of the wooden log named Elian and the high-tech device right beside him. Elian focused with absolute intensity. He opened his eyes wide, fixing his gaze on the infrared sensor beneath the screen. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The tablet screen softly lit up, switching from sleep mode to active mode. Fortunately, the brightness was set to the lowest level, night mode, so the light did not spill out too strongly. With the precise eye movements he had secretly practiced night after night, the virtual cursor on the screen began to move. It trembled, slipping a few times because Elian was too tense, but finally it stopped exactly on the camera-shaped icon, safety camera. Click. With a decisive blink, the recording interface opened. The tablet's front-facing camera with its wide-angle lens captured Elian clearly in the foreground and the adulterous couple unmistakably in the background. But the most valuable thing was not the explicit images, it was the conversation that followed. Garrick, while buttoning his shirt back up, shouted loudly, his voice slurred but every word clear. "Baby, the moment that old judge signs the order on Friday, I'll wire $5 million to the Cayman account. And your crippled husband, Monday morning, the welfare home's van will come and haul his body away. He'll rot to death there in just a few weeks." Maris ran her fingers through her hair, giggling. "He deserves it. I only regret not pulling his breathing tube earlier and getting rid of the burden." On Elian's tablet screen, the red REC dot blinked relentlessly. Every confession, every murder plot, every act of money laundering was being captured in crystal clear HD audio. Elian held his breath. His eyes shifted to the cloud sync button. A progress bar appeared. Uploading 10%, 45%, 80%. The house Wi-Fi was weak. Elian stared at the bar, silently praying Maris would not turn back now. 99%. Upload complete. The video file was sent directly to the secure data servers of the medical equipment provider, a system to which Attorney Vance had authorized access for monitoring his client's device usage. Elian closed his eyes and shut off the screen. Darkness returned, but in that darkness, he was holding the blade of justice. Thursday night, the snowstorm outside grew increasingly violent. Wind screamed through the window cracks like a mournful wail. But inside the house, the atmosphere was warm, filled with the giddy excitement of an impending escape. The living room was cluttered with wide-open Louis Vuitton suitcases. Maris hummed a cheerful tune as she packed expensive silk dresses and brand-new passports into the luggage. Garrick had already left to prepare documents for the next morning, leaving Maris alone to savor her final night in the suburban prison. She poured herself the last glass of wine and walked toward Elian. Tomorrow, at 9 a.m., Attorney Vance and the mediation judge would arrive to sign the final settlement release. After that signature, Elian would become property of the state, and she would become a queen of the Riviera. Maris pulled a chair close to the hospital bed. The heavy scent of Chanel perfume flooded Elian's nose. She looked at her husband. There was no affection left in her eyes, only raw contempt. "My dear Elian," Maris whispered, her voice sweet but cold like a scalpel blade. She gently brushed her hand across his forehead, an act that looked tender but was really just wiping away the cold sweat of a dying man. "Thank you. Truly, thank you for letting that block of steel fall on you. Because of your sacrifice, tomorrow Garrick and I will begin the life I've always dreamed. Don't worry about the nursing home. I heard they have a TV in the common room. You'll have plenty of time to watch commercials." She leaned lower, pressing her lips close to his ear, whispering the cruelest words, believing he could not resist. "You know, the night you had the accident, I should have called to check on you, but I was busy. I was at a hotel with Garrick. We laughed so much when we heard you were hospitalized. Goodbye, you useless piece of trash." With that, Maris stood up, turned off the dining room light, and left Elian submerged in thick darkness. She went upstairs, her footsteps light and carefree. Elian lay there, motionless. A single tear rolled from the corner of his left eye, the only tear he allowed himself. Not from pain, but from release. Maris's confession had become the final piece, erasing the last trace of pity he still held for this woman. In the darkness, Elian did not close his eyes. He kept them wide open, staring into the void, waiting for dawn. He knew Attorney Vance had received the video file. Tomorrow morning, when the sun rose, he would not be the one on trial. This very room would become the courtroom, and his silence would turn into a death sentence for the demons who thought they had already won. 9 o'clock on Friday morning. The snowstorm had stopped, leaving behind a heavy leaden-gray sky. Elian's living room had been transformed into a makeshift legal office. A mediator judge sat at the head of the table. Beside him were Attorney Vance and a tall, silent male assistant. Across from them, Maris and Garrick sat close together. Maris wore a modest black dress, her face pale with carefully applied makeup to play the role of a grieving wife. Garrick kept checking his watch, his leg bouncing rhythmically against the wooden floor. "Ladies and gentlemen," the judge began in an even, formal tone, "we are here to finalize the transfer of full conservatorship over Mr. Elian and assets totaling $5.2 million to Mrs. Maris." He slid the thick file folder toward her. "Once you sign here, the account freeze will be lifted immediately." Maris glanced at Garrick. He gave a slight nod. She picked up the expensive Mont Blanc pen, her hand trembling slightly with excitement. One more signature, and she would be free. "Wait!" Attorney Vance's voice cut through the room, sharp and firm. He placed his hand over the documents, blocking Maris's pen. "What is this, Vance?" Garrick snapped, his face flushing red. "What trick are you pulling now? The court-appointed doctor already confirmed Elian's incapacity." Vance smiled coldly and reached into his briefcase, pulling out Elian's Toby Dynavox tablet. Under Article 5 of the Pennsylvania Disability Protection Act, before stripping a citizen of their legal rights, we are required to conduct a final cognitive check, regardless of what the medical file says. Maris sneered and leaned back in her chair. Go ahead and perform your little show. He doesn't understand anyway. Vance said nothing. He placed the tablet on the table and turned the screen toward Maris, Garrick, and the judge. Mr. Ellion, Vance spoke loudly, looking toward the hospital bed where Ellion lay motionless. Do you consent to your wife controlling all of your assets and placing you in a public nursing home? The room fell completely silent. Maris rolled her eyes in boredom. Suddenly, the tablet lit up. Not a keyboard, a video clip. Static crackled, then the sound grew clear. Garrick's mocking voice echoed through the room. The moment that old judge signs the order, I'll wire $5 million to Cayman. Your crippled husband will rot to death in the welfare home in just a few weeks. Then Maris's voice followed. He deserves it. I only regret not pulling his breathing tube earlier. Maris's face drained of all color. Her mouth fell open. The pen dropped onto the table with a dry clatter. Garrick sprang to his feet like a coiled spring, his eyes bulging with rage. Turn that off! This is illegal invasion of privacy! Garrick roared, lunging forward to smash the tablet. Bam! Vance's tall assistant, in reality an undercover FBI agent, moved faster than lightning, slamming Garrick to the floor, wrenching his arms behind his back. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed coldly. Garrick Miller, you are under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. Maris screamed hysterically, stumbling backward until her back hit the wall. She trembled, pointing at the screen. No, that's impossible. He's brain paralyzed. At that moment, all eyes turned toward the hospital bed, where Ellion, the crippled husband, slowly opened his eyes. They were no longer dull, but blazing with fury and unshakable resolve. Summoning every ounce of strength left in his body, he tightened his neck and diaphragm muscles and forcefully knocked the oxygen mask off his face himself. The room froze. Ellion stared directly into Maris's eyes, the traitorous wife now shaking uncontrollably. His lips moved. His throat produced a hoarse, broken sound, but it rang through the room like a judge's gavel. Sign the divorce papers. It was not a request. It was a sentence. Sirens wailed throughout the neighborhood. 3 police cars and 1 FBI vehicle screeched to a stop in front of the house, red and blue lights splashing across the white snow. Maris was handcuffed and escorted outside by 2 female officers. She screamed and sobbed, her makeup smeared, desperately twisting around to look at Ellion one last time, begging for forgiveness. Ellion, he manipulated me. I'm your wife. Tell them, please. But Ellion did not look at her. He was looking at Attorney Vance, giving him a slight nod. Vance understood immediately and turned to the police officer. My client would like to add an additional charge, 2nd-degree attempted murder through deliberate medical neglect. Maris collapsed, her legs giving out. An officer read her Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. She was pushed into the back seat of the police car. The door slammed shut, permanently ending her freedom and her glittering dream. Garrick, facing federal fraud charges, would receive a 20-year sentence without parole in a federal penitentiary. His career, reputation, and fortune were completely destroyed. 1 year later, golden autumn covered a 10-acre farm, approximately 4 hectares, in the peaceful suburbs of Pennsylvania. Ellion sat in a modern all-terrain electric wheelchair, gliding smoothly across the green lawn in front of a large oak wood house. His recovery had been remarkable thanks to the most expensive physical therapies funded by his trust. Though he could not yet walk normally, he could move both arms and speak fluently, his voice only slightly hoarse. Beside him, a golden retriever named Justice lay basking in the sunlight, lazily wagging its tail. From inside the house, Ellion's elderly parents stepped out carrying a pot of hot tea. They laughed warmly, smiles Ellion had not seen in many years. Ellion picked up his iPad. On the screen was the blueprint for the Ellion Fund, a haven for injured workers. He had just signed a $2 million check to build a free rehabilitation center for poor laborers abandoned by their employers. He scrolled through local news headlines. Former banker Garrick Miller brutally assaulted by fellow inmates, and Maris, the cruel wife, denied appeal for the third time. Elian turned off the screen and took a deep breath of the clean air of freedom. He pulled an old wedding photo of himself and Maris from his wallet. He looked at it one last time. No hatred remained, only pity for a life blinded by greed. He tossed the photo into the outdoor fireplace. The flames flared up, reducing the painful past to ashes.